On today's True Echo, we bring you a powerful story that shook a courtroom and echoed across the nation. A decorated black veteran, once a guard at the tomb of the unknown soldier, was told by a judge to remove the Medal of Honor from his chest. What followed wasn't just a viral moment. It was the unraveling of years of quiet injustice, and the rise of a man whose stillness spoke louder than any outburst ever could. Stay with us. You could hear a pen drop when he walked in. Sergeant Delrin Massey didn't walk like a man seeking attention. He walked like a man who'd long since learned how to carry weight, his own and others. The polished black shoes on his feet tapped gently across the floor of the Wilmington County Courthouse, each step measured, deliberate. He wasn't on trial. He wasn't even the plaintiff or the defendant. He was there as a character witness, called to speak on behalf of an old friend, another veteran, Julius Rowe, who'd gotten tangled in a contract dispute over a VA-funded renovation project. Routine case. On paper. But when Delrin stepped into that courtroom in full dress uniform, with his cap tucked under his arm and ribbons aligned perfectly above his heart, everything changed. Not because of how he looked, but because of what he wore. Just above the left breast pocket, gleaming softly under the courtroom lights, was the one medal that commanded silence the moment it was seen, the Medal of Honor. He hadn't worn it for publicity. He rarely wore it at all. But Julius had called him 2 weeks earlier and said, "I need you here, Delaware." His voice had cracked. "They're making me out to be a liar." Delrin didn't ask for details. He booked a ticket, ironed his uniform, and drove up from Chesapeake, Virginia without fuss. He never expected a battle in that courtroom. But then again, he hadn't expected Judge Franklin Dorsey either. Sergeant Delrin Massey, U.S. Army. Retired, the bailiff announced. Delrin approached the stand without a glance at the gallery. His face was calm, unreadable. He raised his right hand to be sworn in. And that's when it happened. Judge Dorsey cleared his throat. "Hold on." The clerk stopped mid-sentence. The lawyers looked up. Even Julius blinked, confused. "I need you to remove the medal," the judge said, his voice steady but sharp. A silence fell like a dropped stone. For a second, no one moved. Delrin's brow furrowed. Not in anger, just confusion. "The Medal of Honor," his attorney clarified gently, "is not ceremonial decor. It's a federally issued recognition." Dorsey didn't blink. "This is a court of law. We maintain a neutral environment. No excessive insignia that could influence perception." Delrin didn't argue. Didn't protest. He simply reached up, unpinned the medal from his chest, and placed it in his lap. He didn't set it on the table. He didn't flash it around. He just laid it gently in the folds of his uniform pants and said nothing. But his silence, oh, that silence, it filled every crack in that courtroom like thunder no one could hear. He testified, gave his statement with precision and dignity, then stepped down. No fanfare. No acknowledgement. Just a nod toward Julius and a quiet exit through the back doors. Outside, a reporter from the Wilmington Ledger, a young man barely out of journalism school, was smoking a cigarette near the courthouse steps. He noticed the way Delrin's hand was still clenched around the medal. And he noticed something else too, an intern trailing behind with a phone still recording. That clip hit the internet by sunset. By midnight, it had been shared over 600,000 times. The caption was simple. "Judge orders Medal of Honor recipient to remove medal in court." Seriously? And just like that, what began as a routine testimony became something else entirely. By morning, veteran forums were ablaze. This can't be real. Medal of Honor? In a U.S. courtroom? Removed? Shameful. Veterans groups from California to Carolina started tagging local representatives. Gold Star families wrote open letters. Influencers, most of whom had never stepped foot in a combat zone, added their outrage to the mix. But beneath the noise, beneath the hashtags and headlines, one thing remained unchanged. Delrin Massey didn't say a word. He drove back to his hotel, took a hot shower, laid the medal on the bedside table, and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, staring out the window at a half-empty parking lot. He didn't check his phone. Didn't read the comments. That night, he called one person. "You okay?" his mother, Cora Massey, asked when she answered the phone. "Yeah," he said. "Just tired." She waited. She always waited. "He made me take it off," Delrin added softly. "Said it was too much." There was a pause. Then, in her quiet southern drawl, she said, "You earned that with your hands, your feet, and your blood. Some folks don't know what respect smells like until they choke on it." He didn't respond. Just let her words float through the phone like steam off a mug of tea. 2 days later, he was back in Chesapeake. No interviews. No tweets. No cameras waiting at the airport. Just him and Boone, his Labrador mix, back on their usual trail behind the church. He wore an old hoodie and gym shorts. To most, he looked like just another man walking his dog. But to the people in town, he was something else. The man who always stood tall, especially when told to sit down. And somewhere, not far behind the scenes, the ripple had already begun. Not a protest. Not a press conference. But a reckoning. The air in Chesapeake was thick with early summer warmth. The trail behind the church, familiar and quiet, gave Delrin room to think, or more accurately, not to. Boone trotted ahead, tongue lolling, happy to be home. Delrin, on the other hand, hadn't quite found his footing. He didn't want to be a symbol. He didn't want to be a headline. He just wanted to do right by a friend. But things had already spiraled. While Delrin ignored the buzz online, the world hadn't returned the favor. His name had been mentioned on cable news, on podcasts, on morning talk shows. Everyone seemed to have an opinion about what should have happened. Everyone except Delrin. He didn't respond to the media. He didn't return calls. He just kept walking. Cora, his mother, gave him space. But one night, after handing him a cup of tea, she looked at him and said, "You going to let him get away with it?" Delrin looked up from the table. "I'm not sure what "get away with it" means yet." She smiled, just a little. "Well. Don't sit so long you forget how to stand." He didn't answer, but those words stuck. 2 mornings later, he met up with Julius at Carter's Diner, a spot they'd been going to since their days at Fort Drum. Julius looked the same as ever, broad shoulders, salt and pepper stubble, a pair of sunglasses perched on his head. Marine through and through. "You know, I watched that clip like 20 times, Julius said, between bites of scrambled eggs. He didn't just tell you to take it off. He tried to make you disappear." Delrin stared into his coffee. "It was just the uniform. That's how I wear it." Julius shook his head. "You didn't need to say a word, Delaware. That medal made a statement all by itself." Delrin didn't argue. He didn't need to. The truth had already settled into the space between them. "You ever seen him do that to anyone else?" Julius continued. "Ever seen him tell a sheriff to take off his badge? Or a judge to remove a lapel pin? Hell, even a cop in uniform?" "No," Delrin admitted. "That's 'cause it wasn't about the medal," Julius said. "It was about who was wearing it." They finished their meal in silence, but as they walked out into the sunlit parking lot, Julius stopped him. "You got a choice now. You can keep quiet. Or you can start talking." Delrin didn't respond. But that night, he sat at his kitchen table, turned on his laptop, and finally watched the video. He saw himself walk across the courtroom, heard the judge's voice interrupt the swearing-in, and watched himself unclasp the Medal of Honor from his uniform. He paused the frame right there, his hand mid-motion, face unreadable. It wasn't anger he felt. It was something deeper. He hadn't just been silenced. He'd been erased. And it wasn't just about him. It was about every soldier who looked like him, who carried weight this country was fine applauding at parades but quicker to dismiss in a courtroom. The next morning, he responded to one email. Then another. Then 10. And then he made a call, to someone who could help figure out what came next. But before Delrin could say anything publicly, someone else had already started digging. Sierra Lang wasn't your average journalist. At just 31, she'd already built a reputation in Delaware for being methodical, sharp, and allergic to fluff. She didn't chase gossip, she chased patterns. And this story had all the makings of something big. When she saw the viral video, she didn't react immediately. She watched it 5 times. Then she remembered something. 3 years earlier, she'd covered a quiet custody battle where a Latino Marine's testimony had been dismissed on the grounds of emotional instability. Same judge. Franklin Dorsey. That detail caught her attention. She pulled up that case again, Staff Sergeant Luis Barrera. Iraq veteran. Honorable discharge. His testimony was struck from the record because he'd cried during questioning about his daughter. Sierra opened a new folder on her desktop, Dorsey Patterns. 3 hours later, she'd found 5 more cases, all involving minority veterans, where Dorsey had minimized or outright dismissed their presence in court. Words like distracting uniform, undue influence, and emotional conduct repeated in his rulings. She wasn't ready to accuse anyone of anything. But it was a thread. And she intended to pull it. Sierra reached out to Marnie Keller, a court reporter who'd worked in Dorsey's courtroom for years before retiring. Marnie was cautious. "You really want to go there?" she asked. "I'm already there," Sierra replied. There was a pause. Then Marnie said, "He never yelled. Never swore. But he had a way of making you feel like your presence alone was offensive. Especially if you wore your story on your sleeve." "Did he treat white officers the same way?" Sierra asked. Marnie didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Let's just say I've seen sheriffs walk in full dress, badge shining, and he never said a word." The next day, Sierra published a column. Not an op-ed. Just facts. Judicial consistency or selective respect? A look at Judge Dorsey's courtroom history. She listed 6 cases. Quoted direct transcripts. Included dates and court numbers. And ended with one question. Why does military service command respect in some cases, and resistance in others? The article didn't trend immediately. But it didn't need to. It found the right eyes. Veteran forums shared it. Local stations called for interviews. Sierra declined most of them. She wasn't chasing cameras. She was chasing accountability. And the deeper she dug, the more voices came forward. A paralegal. A former public defender. A clerk who'd kept notes for years. They all said the same thing: Dorsey never shouted. He didn't need to. His silence was sharp enough. And somewhere, back in Chesapeake, Delrin Massey finally opened the email Sierra had sent days earlier. He didn't say much. Just, "Appreciate your work. Not ready to talk. Not yet." But it was enough. Because Sierra wasn't finished. And Delrin? He was just getting started. Delrin Massey didn't go on talk shows. He didn't hold press conferences. He didn't even update his social media profile picture, despite the hundreds of new followers and daily tags flooding in. Instead, he returned to what grounded him, walking Boone in the early morning, helping his elderly neighbor patch a leaky gutter, and sitting in the kitchen with Cora while the local radio played jazz low in the background. The firestorm outside didn't touch the rhythm of his life. But it didn't mean he wasn't aware. The boxes of letters started piling up first. Then came the cards, some handwritten by veterans, others crayon-scribbled by school kids. A few were from Gold Star families. One was from a high school senior in Arkansas who wrote, "My granddad wore the medal too. I think you stood for him that day." Delrin read each one. Some twice. A few he quietly placed in a separate box labeled, "To answer." But it wasn't until the letter in the red envelope arrived that something shifted. Inside was a note written in thick blue crayon. "Dear Mr. Massey. My name is Terrence Clay. I'm 12 and I live in Camden, New Jersey. I saw the video of you in court. I told my mom you looked like a superhero. She said you're a real soldier. I want to be one too. I didn't know people could be mean to heroes. I think you are brave even when you didn't say anything. Please don't feel bad. Some people just don't know how to act. Your friend, Terrence." On the back was a drawing, Delrin in a courtroom, his Medal of Honor glowing gold, a judge behind a high desk shouting, "Take it off," and Delrin's cartoon figure calmly replying, "No." Delrin chuckled, holding the drawing up to the light. It wasn't accurate. But it was true in a way that mattered more. That night, he didn't just read letters. He answered them. "Dear Terrence. I think superheroes are quiet more than people realize. They also get tired sometimes. But they keep standing up, not because they want to fight, but because some things are worth holding on to. I was proud to wear that medal. But more proud to take care of my people, even when it's hard. Keep asking questions. Keep being kind. And take care of your mom. That's a big job. Your friend, Mr. Massey." The next morning, he mailed that reply, and 5 others. He set aside time each day, writing quietly in the mornings before Boone's walk. It wasn't a movement. It wasn't a campaign. It was healing. But elsewhere, the storm was only intensifying. Judge Franklin Dorsey hadn't spoken publicly since the initial fallout. He had weathered controversy before, a few firm letters, the occasional editorial. But this was different. He'd underestimated the medal. Worse, he'd underestimated the man who wore it. Behind closed doors, his aides tried to spin the silence as professionalism. Let the news cycle pass, they advised. But the news cycle wasn't cooperating. Sierra Lang's follow-up article dropped 3 days later. Process versus Presence, What the Dorsey Interview Missed. In it, she wrote, "Judicial integrity doesn't require the erasure of lived experience. If the Medal of Honor disturbs a court's sense of balance, perhaps the imbalance lies elsewhere." The line hit like a hammer. Then came the petitions. Over 90,000 signatures demanding a judicial ethics review in less than a week. Then came statements from legal associations, veteran coalitions, even retired judges. But the blow that cracked everything came from a man Dorsey had tried to silence years ago, Luis Barrera. Standing in front of his daughter's elementary school in a homemade video, Barrera spoke calmly, his voice trembling but clear. "Judge Dorsey once said I was too emotional to raise my daughter because I cried in court. He said emotion clouds judgment. I think maybe it's fear that clouds his." The video exploded online. 1.2 million views in under 24 hours. From there, the Delaware Commission on Judicial Conduct had no choice. A confidential inquiry was launched. The list of cases under review? 8 and counting. The commission issued a formal notice, ethics review initiated. Confidential, yes, but the leak hit press before the envelope even reached Dorsey's office. Within hours, the Delaware Courier posted the headline. Judicial Commission opens ethics review into Judge Franklin Dorsey's conduct. Back in Chesapeake, Julius dropped by Delrin's house with coffee and a newspaper folded under his arm. "They're coming for him," Julius said, sliding the paper across the table. "Not with pitchforks. With records." Delrin didn't say anything right away. He just sipped his coffee. "You okay with that?" Julius asked. Delrin nodded. It's not about revenge, he said finally. It's about repair. That night, he took a walk with Boone as the sky turned purple over the trees. The trail was quiet. Still. But for the first time since Wilmington, Delrin felt the silence didn't weigh him down. It lifted him. And back home, Cora met him on the porch. They asked you to be loud, she said as she rocked slowly in her chair, but your silence was the part they couldn't handle. Delrin sat beside her. Neither of them spoke much after that. But there was no need. Because while headlines faded, something else was happening. Something stronger. The kind of change that doesn't make noise, but leaves a mark. The invitation came in a yellow envelope. Not from a government office or media outlet, but from a middle school in Camden, New Jersey. It was handwritten by a teacher and tucked neatly into the school's letterhead. Dear Mr. Massey. We're holding a Veterans and Leaders Day here at McKinley Middle School next month. One of our 7th graders, Terrence Clay, shared the letter you wrote him with every teacher in our building. It would mean the world to us, and especially to him, if you could speak. Warm regards. Ms. Evelyn Hart, Social Studies Department. Delrin stared at the letter longer than he meant to. He hadn't planned on traveling again. Not for cameras. Not for interviews. Not even for justice. But this wasn't about justice. This was about a kid with blue crayon, a head full of questions, and a belief that men like Delrin were superheroes. A week later, he packed a duffel bag, fed Boone early, and left Chesapeake just after dawn. He didn't wear his uniform. No ribbons. No brass. Just slacks, a button-down shirt, and the Medal of Honor folded carefully in a velvet pouch inside his coat pocket. Still undecided if he'd take it out. McKinley Middle School wasn't glamorous. Brown brick. Rusted railings. Kids hollering at each other near a weather-beaten jungle gym. But the front gate had a crayon-colored banner that read, Honor Week, meet our local heroes. Inside, the gym had folding chairs set up in crooked rows. Paper stars hung from the rafters. A microphone balanced on a milk crate. It wasn't much. But it was real. Delrin waited at the back until they called his name. A few parents clapped. Some kids barely looked up. Others whispered. But in the second row, sitting cross-legged with his eyes wide and shining, was Terrence Clay. When Delrin walked to the front, Terrence gave a tiny wave. Delrin nodded back. No big moment. Just presence. He didn't use notes. Didn't clear his throat or open with a quote. He just looked at the kids and began. My name is Delrin Massey. I'm from Chesapeake, Virginia. I served in the Army for 17 years. I did 3 tours overseas. I stood guard at Arlington National Cemetery. Some kids sat up. Others still fidgeted. A few weeks ago, Delrin continued, I walked into a courtroom to help a friend. I wore this medal. He reached into his coat and pulled it out, letting the light catch on the gold, and a judge told me to take it off. Now they were listening. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just took it off. Not because I was ashamed. But because I didn't need to prove anything to anyone in that room. I knew who I was. He let that sit. Sometimes the world will ask you to shrink. They'll call it humility. But shrinking isn't the same as being quiet. Quiet is a choice. Shrinking is something they want from you, so they can take up more space. One hand went up, a girl in the third row. Were you scared that day? Delrin answered without flinching. No. But I was tired. Another hand, a boy in a hoodie. Did you feel small? Delrin paused, then nodded slowly. For a minute. Then I remembered, he couldn't take anything from me that I didn't hand over. That line lingered. After the talk, Terrence ran up with a new drawing, Delrin sitting on a porch with a woman and a dog. The medal was back on his chest. A speech bubble above his head read, "I still got it." Delrin laughed. "You're getting better at these." Terence grinned. "You gonna wear it next time?" "I think I will," Delrin said. "Thanks for reminding me." The story might have ended there. But back in Wilmington, the Judicial Ethics Committee had finished their preliminary review, and what they found wasn't just disturbing. It was systematic. They uncovered transcripts from over a dozen cases where Dorsey had discouraged military insignia, downplayed decorated veterans' testimonies, or subtly questioned the emotional stability of service members, especially Black and Latino ones. In one 2016 case, a Navy officer had been instructed not to wear his dress blues to a custody hearing. Dorsey had said in his ruling, the absence of external symbolism allowed for a more neutral observation of character. It sounded polished. It was also chilling. Sierra Lang's final installment dropped like a match on dry timber. The man who never raised his voice. She didn't sensationalize. She didn't accuse. She just wrote. This is not just about a robe or a bench. This is about how dignity becomes a disruption when it doesn't wear the right wrapping. Franklin Dorsey never shouted. But what he did said plenty. Within 48 hours, 3 retired judges issued public statements distancing themselves from Dorsey's philosophy. Veterans groups staged quiet protests outside the courthouse, no yelling, just a line of decorated service members standing in uniform, each holding a photo of a comrade whose testimony had been ignored. The public pressure worked. Mid-morning on a Thursday, an official notice was posted. Judge Franklin Dorsey has submitted his resignation, effective immediately. No apology. No press conference. Just a typed 3-paragraph letter citing ongoing distractions incompatible with continued judicial service. 28 years on the bench, over. In silence. Delrin found out later that night. The call came from Sierra. "I figured you should know before it's everywhere." "I appreciate that," he said. "I didn't do any of this to make you a symbol," she added. "I hope you know that." "I know," Delrin replied. "You just gave the silence a name." They talked for a few more minutes, then said goodbye. No big moment. Just mutual understanding. That night, he stood barefoot on the porch with Boone snoring at his feet. Cora joined him with 2 glasses of iced tea. "So. He's gone," she said. Delrin nodded. "You feel anything?" He thought for a second. "Like I need to sweep the porch." Cora smiled. "That's about right." Inside, the Medal of Honor sat in its case now, not tucked away in a drawer, not paraded on a mantle. Just, visible. Like something that belonged. But Delrin knew this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of something else. Delrin didn't speak much in the days after Dorsey's resignation. Not because he was processing anything dramatic, but because it wasn't about Dorsey. Never had been. Delrin had already made peace with the moment the judge tried to strip him of his dignity. He'd moved past that when he stepped off the stand and walked out of the courtroom in silence. But what came afterward, the tidal wave of letters, the school visit, the veteran protests, showed him something deeper. The story hadn't ended in that courtroom. It had begun there. A few days later, a package arrived from McKinley Middle School. Inside was a wooden plaque, hand-painted by the students. On it were the words, "You made us listen." Beneath the message were the handwritten names of each 7th grader who had written to him, drawn him in superhero costumes, or asked him questions during his visit. Delrin didn't hang it in his office. He didn't put it next to the medal. He placed it by the front door. So anyone who walked in, or out, would see it. Meanwhile, Sierra Lang continued her work. Though the Dorsey case had reached its conclusion, something in the legal world had shifted. Judges across the state began quietly reviewing their own courtroom practices. One circulated memo from the Delaware Judicial Council recommended a renewed cultural awareness toward military service members, especially those testifying in uniform. That memo might have gathered dust in another era. But not now. Now it was being adopted. Law students wrote papers on the Dorsey scandal. Panel discussions were held at universities. Even veteran organizations used Delrin's case as a new benchmark for courtroom respect. Delrin hadn't asked for any of it. But that's the thing about real integrity, it echoes whether you ask it to or not. Back in Chesapeake, Delrin began volunteering once a week at the local library, not as a speaker, but as a listener. He started a quiet mentorship circle for returning veterans who struggled to reintegrate. No name. No flyers. Just a room, some chairs, and hot coffee. They called it the hour. Every Thursday evening, a group of 6 to 8 veterans would gather, young, old, male, female, some still active duty, some long retired. They didn't share war stories. Not unless they wanted to. They shared now stories. A guy who couldn't sleep since getting home. A woman who avoided grocery stores because the crowds made her flinch. A Marine who missed his kids but didn't know how to say it. Delrin didn't try to fix anything. He just listened. Sometimes that was enough. Cora helped too. She cooked for the meetings, gumbo, baked mac, banana pudding. She never stayed, just dropped off food, made a joke, and disappeared. One night, as the last veteran filed out and Boone curled up under the table, Delrin sat alone and picked up a letter someone had left behind. No name. Just handwriting that said, "I used to think being quiet made me invisible. But you showed me it can make people see. Thanks for that." Delrin read it twice. Then he folded it, placed it inside a small box of letters he now kept near his bookshelf, one separate from the fan mail. This box wasn't about praise. It was about presence. The national conversation was changing, too. Sierra had been invited to speak on multiple panels, NPR, PBS, even the Atlantic Review wanted her to write a long-form piece. But she turned most of them down. "I'm not the story," she kept saying. "He is." But even she knew the story was no longer just Delrin's. It was about everyone who'd ever been silenced with a smile. Everyone who had been told, "Not here," or "Not like that," or "That's not appropriate." People who were praised in one context and diminished in another. Celebrated on Veterans Day. Questioned in court. And that's why her final article, "Presence is Not a Disruption," went viral. In it, she wrote, "Some people are so used to power that even quiet dignity feels like defiance. But dignity isn't defiant. It's human. And when someone carries that dignity into a room where it's not expected, it doesn't make them dangerous. It makes them necessary." Delrin didn't read that piece the day it came out. He was busy writing something else. A new letter. To a young man stationed in Okinawa, who had emailed him privately saying he'd considered leaving the military after watching the courtroom video. "I thought I didn't belong in a uniform if they could treat you like that," the soldier had written. "But then I saw the way you walked out. And something about that made me stay." Delrin wrote back that night. "You don't serve because of what they see. You serve because of what you know. If you walk away, let it be because your time is done. Not because someone else tried to define it for you." He folded it carefully, slid it into an envelope, and dropped it in the outgoing box by the front door. Beside the plaque that read, "You made us listen." Because he had. And now, others were starting to speak, too. Delrin never imagined his silence would start a chain reaction. He didn't crave vindication, but it arrived anyway, wrapped not in applause, but in slow, seismic change. Weeks after Dorsey's resignation, motions began to quietly reopen. Not headlines. Not breaking news. But files. Cases once dismissed with carefully veiled judgments, many involving veterans, were now being revisited under new scrutiny. Luis Barrera's custody case reopened. The Navy officer Dorsey silenced in 2016. Motion filed for retrial. A Bronze Star recipient denied witness credibility in a property dispute. That case, too, was being re-evaluated. Public defenders who had once been hesitant to speak up were now using Sierra Lang's investigative series as supporting documentation in motions. Sierra herself continued to publish, shorter, more targeted updates this time. But always fact-based. Always precise. Meanwhile, Delrin kept writing letters. He responded to high school students, to widows, to young veterans overseas. He didn't try to be wise, he just told the truth. The kind of truth no one teaches you in boot camp. You don't owe them anger. You owe yourself peace. People will underestimate you because it's easier than admitting they're wrong. Let them. Stillness is not surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. Each line handwritten. No assistant. No form letters. Just him, a pen, and the knowledge that every word mattered to someone. One afternoon, a letter arrived with an unfamiliar return address. Delrin opened it cautiously. It was from a retired judge in Kansas. Dear Mr. Massey. I watched your moment in that courtroom more times than I'd care to admit. I spent 3 decades on the bench. I thought I understood neutrality. But now I realize, neutrality without humanity is just fear in a robe. I never said anything when I saw judges do what Dorsey did. I won't make that mistake again. Respectfully. Judge Alan Hewitt, Ret. Delrin sat with that letter a long while. Not for ego. But because it reminded him that the impact wasn't just on those who watched, it was on those who reflected. And then came the request. A week later, Delrin received a call from the State Bar Association of Delaware. They were hosting a judicial ethics symposium and wanted him to speak, not as a political act, but as a witness to the lived consequences of courtroom culture. He almost said no. He hated microphones. Hated feeling like he had to perform truth. But Julius, sitting across from him that evening with a plate of fried catfish and a knowing look, raised one eyebrow and said, "You know what happens when people like you say no? The wrong people get to speak uninterrupted." Delrin didn't answer. But the next morning, he called back and said yes. The event was held in Wilmington. Same city. Different room. No courtroom this time, just a wood-paneled conference hall with rows of neatly dressed judges, attorneys, law students, and policy advisors. A soft murmuring buzz filled the space until the moderator said, "Please welcome Sergeant Delrin Massey." Delrin walked to the front, Medal of Honor clipped modestly to his lapel. No full dress uniform. Just who he was. He didn't speak with fire. Or fury. He didn't need to. His words were calm. Deliberate. Like someone placing bricks for a foundation. When I was told to take off this medal, I didn't argue. Because I've learned that some things are louder when you don't raise your voice. I didn't feel ashamed. But I did feel erased. He scanned the room. No one looked away. Courtrooms are supposed to be where truth is protected. But that day, my presence was treated like a danger to neutrality. Not because of what I said, but because of what I represented. He paused. I wasn't there as a soldier. I was there as a man who carried responsibility. And what was taken off my chest that day wasn't a decoration, it was recognition. Not for what I'd done. But for who I still was. Silence. Not awkward silence. The listening kind. Judges shouldn't have to apologize for standards. But they should understand the difference between neutrality and negation. You can't honor someone's sacrifice in a parade and erase them in a courtroom. He ended simply. My name is Delrin Massey. I didn't come here to demand anything. I came here to remind you what respect looks like when it's quiet. And then he stepped down. There was no standing ovation. But there didn't need to be. Because in the world of power and law, acknowledgement isn't always applause. Sometimes it's the stillness after someone stops speaking, and no one dares to fill the air. After the symposium, a clerk approached him quietly. She had tears in her eyes. "I interned for Dorsey in 2021, she said. "He once told me, decorations are distractions. I thought maybe I was imagining something wrong. But now I know I wasn't." Delrin offered no judgment. Just a nod. She whispered, "Thank you. For helping me not carry that silence alone." That night, back at his hotel, Delrin sat on the edge of the bed. He didn't turn on the TV. He just looked out at the Wilmington skyline. It felt different now. Not hostile. Just, smaller. And then his phone buzzed. A message from Terence Clay's mom. He started writing other veterans now. He calls it, the hero letters. He says you gave him the idea. Thought you'd want to know. Delrin smiled to himself. Because this was the point. Not the fallout. The forward. The last time Delrin Massey visited Camden, it wasn't for a speech. He didn't carry notes or a medal. He carried a picture frame. Inside it was Terence Clay's original letter, the one in thick blue crayon, the one that called him a superhero, and the reply Delrin had written beneath it in his steady, even hand. He'd taken it to a local frame shop in Chesapeake, had it matted in navy blue with a gold trim, and mounted under protective glass. He didn't call ahead. He didn't ask for recognition. He just showed up. The school secretary's eyes widened when he walked through the door. "You're Mr. Massey, right?" He nodded. "Is Terence here today?" 10 minutes later, the boy came skidding down the hallway in squeaky sneakers, hoodie askew, eyes wide with disbelief. "You really came back?" he asked. "I told you I might," Delrin said. "I don't like breaking promises." He handed Terence the frame. "This belongs with you. You reminded me of something important. That we don't always need to speak loudly to be heard." Terence stared at the frame like it was glowing. "I started writing more letters," he said. "To other veterans. My mom says it's my hero project." Delrin smiled. "That's a good habit. Words travel farther than people sometimes." They sat together on a bench near the library. A teacher passed by and nodded, giving them space. Boone, who had come along for the trip, lay curled on the cool tile, watching quietly. Terence glanced at the medal on Delrin's chest. "You brought it this time?" "Yeah," Delrin said. "Thought it deserved a little sunlight." "Does it feel heavy?" "Some days," Delrin replied. "Other days, it feels like armor. Just depends on what I'm carrying with it." Terence looked back at the frame in his lap. "Do you think I could earn one of these someday?" Delrin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked, "You want to protect people?" Terence nodded. "I want to help. I don't like bullies." "Then you're already doing more than most," Delrin said. "Just keep your heart strong. Your hands steady. And your voice honest." Before he left, Delrin gave Terence something else, a small, blank notebook. "Write everything," he said. "Even the parts that don't make sense yet. That's how we figure them out." Back in Chesapeake, the air had turned crisp. Autumn was settling in. Leaves fell gently across the walkway leading to Delrin's front door. He still met with the veterans at the library once a week. Still wrote letters most mornings. Still walked Boone down the trail behind the church every evening at sunset. And every so often, new envelopes would arrive. One from a mother whose son had started carrying himself differently after seeing Delrin's story. One from a retired colonel who had always felt invisible in civilian court until now. One from a young Marine stationed overseas who wrote, "I didn't know silence could be this strong." The plaque from McKinley still hung by the front door. You made us listen. And beside it now, a new one, smaller, handcrafted, sent by Terence and his class. It read, "You gave us our voice." One evening, after Cora had gone to bed and Boone was dozing at his feet, Delrin sat down at the kitchen table and opened a fresh sheet of paper. Not for a speech. Not for a story. For a letter. To the one who thinks silence is the only answer. I want you to know something. You don't have to raise your voice to leave a mark. You don't have to win an argument to make a point. Sometimes you just have to stay where you are, even when someone's trying to move you. That's how we protect things. Our name. Our dignity. Our place in the world. And when the moment passes, you'll still be standing. And they'll remember that you didn't move. Keep walking. Delrin. He folded it, placed it in an envelope, and added it to the box labeled to send. Because that's how legacy works. Not in the noise. Not in the fame. But in the weight of words carried forward by those who needed them most. Delrin Massey didn't fight back with fury. He didn't launch a campaign or demand justice with headlines. He walked into a courtroom with quiet dignity, and when asked to remove a symbol of the highest military honor, he didn't shout. He simply refused to be erased. And in doing so, he reminded an entire nation what real strength looks like, not in volume, but in presence. Not in aggression, but in truth. As his mother once told him, some folks don't know what respect smells like, until they choke on it. Let that echo. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you know, or someone you aspire to be, don't let it end here. Subscribe to True Echo for more powerful, true-feeling stories. Leave a comment with your thoughts, or tell us who your quiet hero is. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes, the stillest voices are the ones we remember most.